When it rains, I want you more. Written by Podfic. Read by Arashi. Standing in front of his locker, Ferdinand pulled out his bag and ruffled through it. He knew it was futile, but there was a part of him that hoped to find his umbrella folded inside at the bottom. Instead, he merely tossed away a few stray papers and receipts before putting all of his textbooks back. He knew he should have checked the weather forecast this morning, but he accidentally overslept. His alarm never went off since he forgot to set it. A late-night study session at his desk ended up becoming a much-needed slumber after he passed out on hunched over his books. Frowning, he pulled out his phone and checked the weather report. The odds were not great. The rain was supposed to be pouring for at least another hour, and he needed to catch his train back home on time. His father would scold him if he was even a minute late. It seemed he didn't have much of a choice. He would have to run out into the downpour and try to duck under cover until he reached the station. Adjusting the strap of his bag across his chest, Ferdinand made his way down to the main entrance of the building. He stared out the glass doorway and watched the raindrops hitting the cement. The sound of girls giving shrill cries as they bundled together under umbrellas filled the room. He also saw some other students dashing off without a coat or umbrella, but instead were holding their book bags over their heads. Their shoes splashed each time they hit a puddle before they were out of Ferdinand's vision. Ferdinand pushed the door open and stood outside beneath the protruding roof. He was stalling for time. Glancing up at the sky, the horizon was a muted gray color and cluttered with long clouds. There was no chance that a break in the rain would be arriving any time. Sucking in a deep breath, he marched forward and tried to sprint to the next area of cover he spotted. He found a large tree beside the sidewalk and quickly hid beneath it. Instantly, Ferdinand was already dripping from the storm. His hair was damp, and a few droplets fell down his forehead. He tried to comb his bangs out of his eyes, groaning in frustration at the feeling of his uniform's buttoned shirt sticking to his skin. He shook it out a few times and loosened the knot of his tie around his collar. It was a bitter, cold rain, too, the type that could probably get him sick if he lingered for too long outside. Ferdinand could not afford to catch a cold. Exams were right around the corner, and he needed to be healthy enough to come to class and study. Shivering, he was about to make his next dash to the overhang of a shop front when he heard the sound of a familiar laugh. "Forget something, Aya?" Turning his head, Ferdinand saw Hubert walking up behind him while carrying a large black umbrella. He had an air of superiority about him. His long legs had a graceful stride as he strolled, and he had his own leather bag hanging off his shoulder. Hubert's pink lips were curved into a cheeky grin as he met Ferdinand's puzzled gaze. "Hubert?" Ferdinand held back the urge to retort. He merely waited for Hubert to stand beside him, underneath the branches of the tree. "You have working eyes. You can see that I am without an umbrella." "Indeed, that is a shame, considering this afternoon's storm." Hubert clicked his tongue. He had one hand upon the handle of the umbrella. The other went to tussle his shaggy black hair. He hated the rain. It always made his hair curl like mad from the humidity. Ferdinand rolled his eyes. "If you have nothing better to do than state the obvious, then I will be on my way. I have a train to catch." Before Ferdinand could walk off, Hubert grabbed his shoulder and pulled him backwards. He lifted the umbrella over his head, shielding him from the rain. "Idiot. Walk with me. We are heading to the same station." At first, Ferdinand was offended by the crude remark, but his anger quickly fizzled out. He stared up at Hubert, trying to decipher his calculating green eyes. The older boy did not seem to be holding any ulterior motives. Glancing between the heavy downpour and back at Hubert's scowl, he realized that this was an attempt to be courteous. Hubert was offering to share his umbrella with him. He could have not stopped and merely walked past Ferdinand, or he could have teased him before leaving him to shiver in the rain. Instead, Hubert was willing to walk the entire way to the station by his side. While there were many days that Ferdinand thought the worst about Hubert, he knew there was a kindness within him, behind his jaded exterior. "You are willing to share with me?" Ferdinand asked nervously. He was still a tiny bit skeptical. Scoffing, Hubert removed his hand from Ferdinand's shoulder and shoved it in his pocket. "There is no one else here but you. Of course I am offering my umbrella to you. Now, move it, before I leave you behind." "Oh, all right." Ferdinand quickly followed after Hubert, standing very close to him as they huddled beneath the umbrella. He doesn't think Hubert has ever let him get into his personal bubble like this before. It sort of felt like an honor. The two men continued down their path, walking along the sidewalk and avoiding puddles that formed in divots in the cement. They kept to the right side, dodging other pedestrians that were also trying to stay dry despite the weather. The sound of droplets bouncing off the umbrella over his head was oddly relaxing to Ferdinand. He also enjoyed the earthy scent that seemed to fill the air when it freshly rained. Turning his attention to Hubert, the younger man quickly observed him up close. Hubert had a very strong jawline, and his cheekbones were pointed like a knife. His eyes had dark circles beneath them, indicating his lack of sleep. His eyebrows were thin and furrowed across his forehead, and his pink lips were pressed into a straight line. His resting expression was not the friendliest. In fact, Hubert appeared quite unsociable to the wandering eye. Yet, Ferdinand had never feared speaking with him. While his snarky attitude was unfavorable, Hubert was a wonderful conversation partner. If Ferdinand could manage to have a genuine chat with Hubert instead of arguing, his intellect was very high. His comments were clever, and his humor was dry, but amusing. Ferdinand found debates with Hubert to be a favorite pastime for him. It sharpened his speech skills, and it provided a worthy adversary that helped him see things in a different perspective. While deeply thinking to himself, Ferdinand's idle staring was noticed by Hubert. Flustered by the weight of those amber eyes boring into him, Hubert looked down at his feet. "It is rude to stare," Hubert muttered. "Ah, my apologies, Hubert. I did not think I was staring at you for so long," Ferdinand apologized, with a light dusting of pink over his cheeks. Hubert huffed in annoyance. "Was there something on my face?" Ferdinand shook his head. He felt his pulse quicken as he considered what response to offer as an explanation for his actions. "Nothing out of the ordinary. I suppose I never really noticed how you have matured recently, Hubert. You have a handsome face." Astonished by such a blunt statement, Hubert looked at the other man as if he had dropped a bomb on him. Hubert gasped and sputtered for a few seconds before closing his mouth. He had no words. Regret flooded Ferdinand as Hubert appeared appalled by his statement. Trying to turn and explain himself to Hubert, Ferdinand nearly lost his footing. The tip of his shoe caught into the edge of the sidewalk that was higher than the rest. Before he could tumble, Hubert dropped the umbrella and reached for Ferdinand. He grabbed onto his arm, yanking him back with enough force to pull him into his chest. The water descended upon them in heavy drops, soaking their hair and uniforms. Hubert held onto Ferdinand, as if he would crumble into 1,000 pieces. He glared down at him, despite the tenderness of his embrace. "Idiot! Watch your step!" Hubert growled at him. "Hubert!" Ferdinand lifted his head, staring up in confusion as Hubert scolded him. His body should have been cold from the downpour, but a warm fuzziness filled his chest and began to stretch across his body. He felt that gentle warmth spreading through his limbs as Hubert held him. "Ugh, look at us, drenched like rats," Hubert muttered. He slowly released Ferdinand from his grasp when he was certain that the boy was stable. Scanning around the area, he saw his umbrella was gently rocking back and forth on the ground. It collected a small amount of rainwater inside of it as it was turned upside down. As Hubert was picking up the umbrella and shaking out the rainwater, Ferdinand licked his lips and found his words returning to him. "I am sorry for being so clumsy. I apologize for getting you wet." Hubert sighed and held the umbrella back over Ferdinand's head. Now both of their hair was damp and clumping together against their foreheads. "Just be more careful. Focus less on stupid jokes and more on moving your feet." Marching ahead, Ferdinand shuffled to keep at Hubert's pace down the path. He didn't understand the last part of Hubert's comment. "I was not telling any jokes." "Really? Then what was that whole handsome business about? You could not be serious." "I was very serious, Hubert. You have a handsome face. I am envious of your strong features. My face is still so soft, and my cheeks are still puffy," Ferdinand admitted with a frown. Hubert never expected such a thing to come out of Ferdinand's mouth. How could he? When Hubert looked in the mirror, he only saw a ghostly figure that scared everyone who saw him. Ferdinand was ridiculous to be jealous of him. Did the redhead not notice how attractive he was? He had always been beautiful in Hubert's eyes. "You envy me? Oh, how marvelous! A man who is constantly called cute and receives plenty of confessions from classmates is jealous of me." Hubert chuckled and shook his head. "You are foolish if you cannot see how you surpass me in that aspect." Ferdinand was flushed again. He knew he shouldn't say the next part, but his curiosity got the best of him. "Do you think I'm cute?" It was a loaded question. It wasn't fair to ask on the spot. But Hubert folded, his own fair complexion heated with a rouge blush. I have working eyes, so yes, I do think that." Ferdinand gawked at the other man. Hubert thought he was cute. Such a revelation was too much to handle. Ferdinand felt like he needed to sit down before he fell again. Luckily, they had arrived at the train station and quickly ducked into shelter. Closing the umbrella, Hubert went to wait at their gate with Ferdinand. He shook out his damp hair again, not speaking at the moment. He was unsure how to bring up a conversation without making himself sound stupid, so he kept his mouth shut. He checked the time on his phone, waiting for the train to arrive. Eventually, the sound of screeching across the rails alerted them of their upcoming train. Hubert and Ferdinand both waited for the crowd to disperse and exit on the opposite side before the doors opened. Then the two men stepped inside and searched the carts for seats. Once they found 2 spots open, Ferdinand and Hubert sat next to each other. Ferdinand clutched his bag in his lap, while Hubert let his own rest on the floor behind his legs. "Do you have enough room?" Ferdinand asked softly. "Huh? Yes, I am fine," Hubert answered, keeping his hands folded on his lap. He leaned against the back of his seat, feeling the railing of the train against his head. Ferdinand gave a quick glance at his phone. He saw a text from his lab partner, Lawrence, about a project they were working on, so he quickly typed up a response. He also sent a message to his mother, alerting her that he was riding the train back home. Slipping his phone back into his bag, Ferdinand began to feel rather exhausted. It had been a long day. His classes were becoming rather demanding, with exams around the corner. His speech for the debate club was nearly due, and he had to keep up with his campaign to run for student council next month. The sound of rain beating against the windows was nearly lulling him to sleep. Ferdinand found himself zoning out as he listened to the sound of the train chugging along, the muffled conversation of other people, and the speakers overhead alerting the riders of upcoming stops. His eyelids felt heavy and were drooping, and his head began to tilt downwards. As he dozed off, his head fell upon Hubert's shoulder with a soft thud. "Ferdinand?" Hubert turned and saw the redhead fast asleep. He couldn't believe that he could nap on the middle of the train. "You are too naive, falling asleep in public." Watching over him, Hubert found Ferdinand to be a peaceful sleeper. His expression was tender, and his mouth was curved ever so slightly at the corners of his lips. There was no stress to be seen upon his gentle face. He looked angelic, with a rosy tint upon his plush cheeks. Ferdinand even reminded Hubert of a cherub with his soft orange hair that curled from the rain. Someone so innocent deserved a good rest. A quick pounding within Hubert's ribs alarmed the other boy. He pressed a hand to his bosom and felt his face flush. His body heat suddenly grew much hotter, and he felt his chest grow tight. What was this sensation? He had never felt this way before in his life. His heart was racing, just at the sight of Ferdinand. Hubert's mind was overrun with saccharine thoughts. Ferdinand's lips looked so shiny and supple. Ferdinand's hair reminded him of spun gold. Ferdinand's eyes resembled the color of sweet honey. He was purely radiant. Hubert wondered if he was going mad to have such sentimental fantasies about Ferdinand. Chewing on his bottom lip, Hubert felt helpless. He allowed Ferdinand to sleep on his shoulder and did his best not to move. The other man deserved a small nap, and Hubert would keep an eye on him. He would keep Ferdinand safe and wake him up before his stop. Timidly, Hubert rested his head over top of Ferdinand's own. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, basking in the moment. Who knew when he would get such a chance again to be this compassionate towards Ferdinand, without fear of being judged? Hence, he cherished the physical contact. No one else let him get this close. Only Ferdinand had that sort of trust. Tapping his foot against the floor, Hubert knew he wouldn't fall asleep. His insomnia never let him slumber that easy. Still, he would simply rest his eyes and listen to the alerts on the speakers. The sound of rain seemed to drown out the rest of the noise, except for the soft breathing of Ferdinand beside him. Perhaps he should walk home with Ferdinand more often, if it gave him another chance to experience this.